But if you're extroverted and your partner's introverted, you've got a problem, because you're always going to be out and about, and that energizes you. And when you're not with people, you're going to be unhappy.
Yeah, this is not entirely true. Welcome to Typology, where we learn how to evolve with our personality type, accepting, understanding it, and based on that, improving our personal lifestyle and improving our personal well-being and transformation, hopefully affecting and helping the entire world in doing so. So this video is about Jordan Peterson and his take on extroversion in the Big Five specifically, and how it is related to compatibility. Now, who am I? I'm Olympia. I have been doing MBTI and Socionics and Enneagram for several years now. It started in around 2013, 14, and I've created my first blog in 2015, and then 16, another one. And around that time, I also started typing clients and their personality types. So you have to know personality types, 16 personality types. These are based on Carl Jung's theory of the Persönlichkeitstypen in German. And basically that's Jungian psychology. However, especially nowadays, including Jordan Peterson, psychology doesn't really acknowledge MBTI or Jungian 16 types. And if it does acknowledge it, they usually say it is pseudoscientific, hence it doesn't really have any value based on that alone. Personally, obviously, I think that personality types have a big value, have a big importance in life, even though they might be currently considered pseudoscience. And I'm a big fan actually of Jordan Peterson. I think what he's doing is really great. He's a great role model, especially for males in this current century, or just in this current zeitgeist. A lot of men don't have a good social male role model anymore, and they are often confused what they should do with their lives. And Jordan Peterson has information on personality types, well, personality types in quotation marks, and on how to improve your life. And I think all of that is really great. And I also first found him by actually watching his lectures on the Big Five traits that you can find on YouTube. I think you can probably still find them. And I found them really, really interesting. The only issue I see, I will probably make a separate video about this topic, but Big Five and 16 personality types are not the same. And unfortunately, one of the most common websites where people take the test about the 16 types is heavily based on Big Five. And in my opinion, that's a big issue, because Big Five traits, a lot of them, if not most of them, are liable to changes. You can change your Big Five traits. However, that's the difference. You cannot change your personality type in terms of Jungian personality type and even Enneagram. When we look at a person's psychology or person's personality, we want to look at both the traits that can change and the traits that cannot change. So that's where I come from with personality type. Personality type is something you have in you. That is your inborn potential, your inborn capabilities, your inborn preferences. And those are not changing, like overall. Now, of course, there can be a great version and a horrible version of the same personality type. So that's the kind of change you can have, but that's it. And I talk more about personality type change in another video. Anyhow, so this is as a side note, but yeah, so I'm making this video because, as I said, I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson, and several of my clients are fans of him as well. And sometimes they ask me, okay, well, I kind of get extrovert in his test, or what does it mean? What do the Big Five traits mean in relation to the 16 types, like a Jungian personality types? Yeah, and I recently saw that he published this little snippet on his Instagram, and I thought, well, I unfortunately don't entirely agree with what he's saying there. As I said, I am a fan of his. I think a lot of the things he says are really great. But when it comes to personality type, there are things I would have to edit if it was me. So I'm just gonna react to that video now and tell you my thoughts on it, just based on the 16 personality types that do not change. And also Enneagram. I think Enneagram also has a big role in this as well, especially the instincts. So let's get into it.
Because I think a lot of people by nature, I think they want to be better. I think they just don't always know how, or have the examples, or have the awareness. So what do you do? What can you do to sort of cultivate that awareness and cultivate that ability to be able to see the things that are going on in your life that are holding you back and fall into a loop or a pattern?
Okay, that's interesting. I want to make a comment here before we go into what he says. Personality type is a great awareness tool, if you get it right, of course. If you get typed by someone who knows what they're saying and doing. Of course, I would say, come to me, I can type you, but of course, it's up to you. At the end of the day, it's important that you find a personality type that really overall encapsulates your strengths, weaknesses, preferences, and what I call purpose role. So I think every of the 16 personality types has a purpose in our society, and it's gonna make you feel fulfilled, and it's gonna enrich the world of people around you. And when it comes to Enneagram basically shows you with the 3 instincts what are your actual true desires and needs on an instinctual level, which will make you feel fulfilled in a certain order. So it's really important to know that. That can bring you a lot of awareness as well. And with the Enneagram type itself is like a strategy of how you are inclined to fulfill those instinctual needs. And it kind of overlaps with the Jungian types as well. So once you know all this stuff accurately, that already can give you a great dose of awareness. However, the trick is that it requires awareness in order to correctly type yourself. So that's why many people mistype themselves. I also have a video about types and stereotypes that I recommend you to watch. But besides that, once you know your types, it's not everything. You still have to go into the specifics of basically how healthy, so to speak, you are within your type. What are your unique strengths, preferences within your type? And that's also what I do in my typings. I don't only give you what your type is overall, I also show you your individual strengths and weaknesses within your functions in relation to other people of your type, and what is holding you back in certain ways, what you could work on. And this is also what I describe as light and dark. So you could be on the light side, meaning you are evolved, you have like a broader, more encompassing view of reality, and the way how you deal with it, the way how you deal with yourself is like on a light level, right? Like angelic, whatever you want to call it, more evolved, more transformed. And then there's also the way where you are darker, you are more devolved, you are more demonic, but not in a good way, in a negative way, in a way that is destructive to yourself and other people in the world. So all these nuances, and you still have to find the person within the personality type. So I think personality type is a great first step, but after that, you really have to see how it relates to you and your own lifestyle and what you can do to improve your lifestyle based on knowing what your personality type is good at, what it needs to feel fulfilled. So this is where also my coaching comes in, but let's just continue with the video.
Well, I have a practical answer for that. If you want to get better, I developed a set of writing exercises with my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we have 2 exercises. One's a personality test. And so for self-awareness, that can be really useful. In fact, if you take it with your partner, you get a couples report. Huh. So it'll tell you 10 aspects of your personality clumped into 5 factors. Extroversion, so how social you are, and how positive, how bubbly, how enthusiastic, how assertive, how talkative. That's all extroversion.
Okay, there are 2 things I have to... Well, okay, I actually did his writing exercise. I think it's also a great tool for more awareness, but that's a bit beside the point. Okay, personality test with a partner. All right, And then he goes into extroversion traits. And let's really deconstruct those. I'm going to do that more during this video, but the first thing he said, how social you are. This is the biggest pet peeve I have with extroversion in pop culture. How social you are. I made a video about how the social instinct is not extroversion. The problem is there are introverts who have the social instinct first, meaning they are the most interested in, let's say, social causes or in social belonging or belonging with friend groups, having social acclaim, things like that, maybe even being famous, whatever. There are introverts who have that as a social first instinct. But at the same time, they have lower energy levels. At the same time, their first cognitive perception is inwards. How they feel about things, how they think about things, how they perceive things, how they personally internalize things. And unfortunately, this is what many people get wrong. And the problem is also that many people forget we have both sides in us. It's about which side predominates. So an introvert that does have an extroverted side in them, and an extrovert has an introverted side in them. But with the introvert, they will have moments when they can bring it out, of course, but overall, they will be introverts. So overall, those moments will take away from their natural energy. And even if they enjoy it, so an introvert could be social instinct first and go to a social gathering and feel really fulfilled doing that, but at the same time, feel like their energy is running out or feel like, oh, this is getting a bit too much because they are using their extroverted functions too much. I also made videos about that, but I also advise some introverts who are too introverted to go into their extrovert side from time to time because that creates a bit more balance. But still, it doesn't mean that this person is an ambivert. This is also what I see. I see like posts describing how, oh, you're an introvert, like you get drained, but you enjoy social gatherings and stuff like that. That's not what, I guess on the surface it looks like ambiversion, but in reality it can just be a normal typical introvert with introverted functioning, but with the instinctual interest or desire to be part of the social group. That's the difference. I think Jordan Peterson is one of those exceptions of a T-type, actually, who has the social instinct first or second. I also find it kind of amusing personally that he thinks he's an extrovert because he gets extrovert in the test. But he gets extrovert in the test just because his social instinct is first or second. He has a strong connection to that social instinct. But when you look at his energy levels, when you look at how expressive he is, facially, in terms of tonation and things like that, overall, let's not focus too much on those couple of times when he's on stage, because like I said, introverts also have an extroverted side. But when he's just normally in his normal mode, he's very, like, his energy is pretty low, his expressiveness is pretty low. And if you compare that to like EF types like Julia Roberts, Tom Holland, Jennifer Lopez, Robert Downey Jr., like if you compare that, it becomes really, really obvious that he's an introvert. And even if you compare him to ET types, people I type as either ENTJ, ECJ, ECP, or ENTP, like Ben Shapiro is a classic extrovert. When you compare those two, it becomes really obvious what true extroversion really is. And both of them are interested in social stuff, right? But one of them simply has lower energy, simply has a view that is based on the internal first rather than the external. That's really how you tell the difference. Whereas an extrovert who has that social desire fits the stereotype much better, obviously. They will do both. They naturally will have that bigger energy, be more gregarious, be more bubbly, and this you can see the best in my video about the EF personality types, ENFJ, ESFJ, ESFP, ENFP. They are the stereotypical extrovert in terms of behavior, minus, let's say, the social gathering aspect. So just based on how bubbly they are, they're going to score high. And in that case, it's not wrong because they are extroverts actually. But then there are extroverts, the ET types, ENTJ, ESTJ, ENTP, ESTP, who can score lower in extroversion, especially when they don't have the social instinct as a first or second instinct. Okay, let's continue.
It's not easy for people to understand each other, and they often feel that their partner is being arbitrary. So, for example, my parents, my mother is very extroverted and my father is quite introverted, especially he's low in enthusiasm.
Low enthusiasm is probably most associated with not being an F type and most likely being a T type, most likely being an IT type, because IT types have, on average, the lowest extroverted feeling, the weakest. And enthusiasm, being able to project that a lot, is related to F, especially FE. So EF types and IF types would be better at that overall.
And so my mom would just as soon be out with people having fun all the time. But that exhausts my dad. And introverts get exhausted by social interactions. I think they're more, their niche is one-on-one and maybe being in nature.
Okay, all right. I agree that introverts tend to get drained more, simply because they get drained when they have to interact too much with the external world outside of them, because the introversion is focused within the individual, within the self. So, for example, TI is, like, introvert thinking is more about how do I think about what is the internal system of something, what is the internal logic based on my understanding. Whereas TE, extrovert thinking, is more about, okay, what are the logical measurements, the logical data outside of myself that I can find, the sources, the data, the information that I can find outside of myself. So that's how introversion and extroversion differs. So like TE is like, okay, what is factually correct? What is like objectively the thing, the information? Whereas with TI, it's more like, okay, what do I personally think? What is my personal take on the theory? I think you can see that also in my videos. But yeah, so that's like the difference. And if you do too much of the extroversion as an introvert, then you're gonna get drained. And it can be social interactions, but it can also even just be being outside a lot. Like even when there's no people, even that could drain you. So it's not specifically just social interactions, it's anything that forces you to go outside of your perspective into the external world in whatever measure, and to interact with it specifically as well. So that's one thing. And okay, when he says he thinks introverts are mostly about a one-on-one or nature, so then that's a one-on-one is the sexual instinct basically, and nature is probably the self-preservation instinct. And those instincts are usually associated with introversion, especially in combination with each other, and the social instinct last. That's what we often think in pop culture is introversion, and Big Five is influencing pop culture. This is why we think, oh, if you do not like social interactions, if you do not like social gatherings, if you do not like being part of a social group, that means you're an introvert. And that's false. Like I said, there are introverts who like those things. I'm one of them. So it doesn't really, it's simply not true. Jordan Peterson himself, in my opinion, is a prime example of that. Yeah, so there are extroverts who have like this big energy, who are outgoing and expressive, high in enthusiasm. But when it really boils down to it, when you ask them, okay, what do you actually prefer? Do you actually prefer, being in social groups and interactions, or do you prefer being with your partner? That's the sexual instinct. Then many of them would say, I prefer being with my partner. And that's simply the SX instinct. So this is why I find it really great that we have two different systems. We have the 16 personality types and we have Enneagram to basically make it a more comprehensive picture.
Whereas extroverts, they want to be in society.
Okay, like I said, that's a social instinct once again. And this, I think, is the main reason why Jordan Peterson thinks he's an extrovert.
And they tell jokes and they smile and they blink more. And there's all sorts of things that go along with it.
They smile more. Yeah, this is the expressiveness. And you see that really well, mostly with the EF types, a bit less with the ET types. But even with those, you can see they're just much more engaged with the world around them. It can be a bit different with EN types because extrovert intuition is still a very mental function. So they will have all these ideas, but these ideas will all be in connection to the external world. So they might go around and they might see something, and then it's going to remind them of a bunch of other things, other ideas that are not even remotely related to what they see specifically. And these associations can be totally, I mean, they are to some extent related to what they're seeing in the external world, but it's not really tangible. And this is why they also often mistype as introverts because of this mental stuff, but it's still tied to the external world. It's not really anything personal. Whereas with NI, the personal comes in when you also see things, let's say, but you start like attaching a personal imagery or symbolism to it. So like looking at a sunset, and let's say the sunset is really tumultuous in terms of its appearance, and then the NI person would connect it to, this means something tumultuous is going to happen in my life in relation to a certain person, a certain development. Like it becomes way more specific. Whereas with NE could look like at the sunset and be like, wow, okay, this reminds me of like the ocean, how it's like crashing into this and that, whatever. Like it becomes this mental thing. Whereas an SE would just look at the sunset and be like, oh yeah, these are great colors. This looks really pretty. And I guess when it's connected to SI, then it would go more into, okay, SI would be, okay, what kinds of sunsets does this remind me of from the past that I have had in the past, or how does the sunset make me physically feel? Like how does it physically impact me? So this is the introversion again, whereas the SE is more like, okay, great sunset. I guess SE could maybe also kind of associate and be like, okay, the sunset reminds me of these colors and these other colorful things that I know. So it kind of can also be a bit associative, but the associativeness is way more sensing based. Whereas with the intuition, it's intuitive. It's more like a representation of something in an abstract way rather than so tangible. So yeah, okay. If you want to know more about the way how I deal with the functions, how I describe them, just go to my blog and read the article on that. And also, I've actually got 2 videos that also go a bit more into the functions.
But if you're extroverted and your partner's introverted, you've got a problem because you're always going to be out and about, and that energizes you. And when you're not with people, you're going to be unhappy.
Yeah, this is not entirely true. Introverts and extroverts can harmonize really well with each other. I'm going to go more to it soon. Okay, but that you're going to be unhappy if you're not out and about. To some extent, that can be true. Mostly if you're an ESFP or ESTP type with the first function extrovert sensing. If you're an intuitive ENTP or ENFP, you actually do not need to be literally outside of the house. But you will still need to engage your mind with a lot of different information of an abstract nature. They still need the external world also to generate that in their minds. With an ESFP or ESTP, I guess the worst thing would simply be if they are stuck in a room forever or something like that. But it doesn't really necessarily mean that they have to be around people. The people aspect is mostly the social instinct, like I said, and to some extent being a feeler type, because your strength is naturally going to be in relation to people. That's also why Socionics calls feeling ethics. You don't necessarily have to be around people as an extrovert, especially if you're an ET extrovert, and especially if social instinct is last for you. It just means you need to interact with the world outside of you, outside of your four walls, outside of your mind. Like an ETJ or ESTJ has to read about statistics or data or whatever is happening or logic or whatever, like just not staying inside of themselves or in their own little bubble. Yeah, so then they're going to be unhappy.
Or you're going to be not happy,
Right.
not unhappy, because that's neuroticism, but you're not going to be happy. The positive emotion is going to go away. And so how do you bridge that gap? That's how you are. It's not some arbitrary decision. It's built into you.
Your instincts are built into you, and whether you're an introvert or extrovert is built into you. So that's correct, and that's not going to change. So that aspect, yes, it's built into you. It doesn't change. However, the amount of sociability you might display or you might engage with might change over time, especially if you have an avoidant attachment style. It might inhibit your natural sociability skills, for example. Once you are more secure and more confident, you might discover that you can be more sociable than you thought you were. So that's the trait where it can change a little bit. But whether you actually value social interactions depends on your instincts, and that doesn't change. And whether you have high energy and whether you are naturally focused on the external first and then the internal, that's also built into you. That also doesn't change.
And so if you really diverge in extroversion, well, that's a problem.
I actually recommend extroverts and introverts together, but it depends. So in the past, when I was very new to MBTI and I figured, okay, I'm obviously an introvert, and I knew extroverts in my life who were really annoying to me. So I thought, okay, that means I must be only with an introvert. All extroverts suck. All extroverts are annoying. That's what I thought, just based on that little experience with some people in my life. But then I came across personality type theory. I came across like the theory that basically extroverts and introverts can go really well together. It depends a lot on their functions and how they go together. So this is why I recommend introverts and extroverts together, as long as they have the same 4 cognitive functions in MBTI or in Socionics if they're on the same quadra. These are the kinds of extroverts introverts pairings I would recommend the most. And I would recommend the least, like definitely avoid, like the worst ever is an introvert with an extrovert and they both have no functions in common, and they also have in MBTI, the 3 letters different. So like INFJ, ESTJ would be the worst. But the thing is, like I said in the previous video, INFJ, ESTJ, all that stuff is too much influenced by Big 5 to the point it even kind of totally diverges almost from Jungian personality types like cognitive functioning, where it's like, well, it almost becomes meaningless. So only if you really understand the cognitive functions and socionics and my take on it as well, then you can go with my recommendation. Otherwise, it's just too much going all over the place. Yeah, but you can be an extrovert and you can have an introvert as a partner. It can even be compatible. So I think at this point, he's not exactly spot on. But it's true that there are certain romantic instinctual compatibility issues with people who have the social instinct first and social instinct last, if there's a certain configuration there. So I would like you to watch that video so you really understand what I mean. So there are a few exceptions where it's true, but overall I don't think this is true. And overall I think it builds and creates a false or at least flawed picture of what extroversion, introversion really entails. So get typed by me if you want and figure out my stuff. And subscribe, like, share, all the good stuff. Okay, see you next video. Bye.